This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State's Jeanne Ifft and John Holman start the show as they explain annual forage insurance and how producers can use it in their operation as a risk mitigation tool. Sarah Ganske and Jeanne Falk Jones from K-State continue today's show as they discuss weed control before wheat harvest and why it is crucial to get control before the combine gets in the field. Ending the show is K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan as he talks about some of the benefits of warm season grasses, which can still be established through midsummer. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show discussing annual forage insurance with K-State Flintshire Agricultural Policy Chair Jeanne Ifft and K-State Cropping Systems and Forage Agronomist John Holman. Jeanne, John, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Shelby, always a pleasure.
Jeanne, what is annual forage insurance?
Any annual crop that is grown to be fed to livestock, whether it's grazing, silage, grain, hay, anything, can be insured as under a rainfall insurance policy. So it's not like your typical crop policy. It's multi-peril insurance. It covers several types of damage from too much moisture to drought. This is insurance for annual forage crops, and it only pays out if there's less rainfall than usual.
And now as we're towards the beginning of June, why is this something we're discussing?
There is a deadline, July 15th, that's coming up pretty soon in about a month. So this is usually about the time you're discussing it. If a producer is interested, this is the time they need to be talking to an agent. And this is for any annual forage crops that's planted from August of this year, so August of 2026 through July of 2027. One of the other unique things about this policy is you don't have to use it. You don't have to have the coverage, but if you want to have the option to have the coverage, you have to sign up by July 15th.
John, why do you see producers using this?
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize that point that Jeanne made. This deadline, you have to sign up if you want the option to use it. It isn't a requirement to use it. So that's kind of the nice thing about this. But if we think about Kansas and just the variability in rainfall from year to year, this year is a very good point of that. Eastern Kansas has been getting a lot of rain. Western Kansas has been struggling with the drought. So we're still extremely dry, and those that need forage, we're still sitting in a situation of quite a bit of risk, and that's what insurance helps do, is offset that risk. And if we look at time of rainfall, April, May, June are the most critical rainfall months for growing native pasture, and we have received some rain, and so we're thankful and blessed to have gotten what we got, but we're still very, very much deficit. So producers may be looking to grow more summer forages to try and make up that deficit, and so the annual forage insurance, it helps mitigate some of that risk if conditions stay dry, that there will be an insurance payment to help offset that loss of crop that they wouldn't have.
And as John mentioned, a lot of variability in Kansas. So Jeanne, when looking at that, who is using it in Kansas and where are they usually located?
Well, not too much in eastern Kansas, surprise, surprise, based on what John said. But basically, the further west you get, the more producers you have using it, and also the further south. That's the general trend that we're seeing. This product has only been available since 2014. And in 2020, we were at about 100,000 acres, and it's increased fivefold since then. We're at over 500,000 acres this year. So it has grown quite a lot. And I know a lot of it's being used on triticale in western Kansas. So there is a yield product, a multi-peril product available for triticale, but a lot of producers seem to prefer annual forage for it.
So while we're thinking about this annual forage insurance, what are some key things to know, for example, billing?
I want to talk a little bit more on the agronomic side of things. So you have the option to cover different crops. So if we think about kind of how this program works, this program as Jenny said, the deadline to sign up is July 15th. So it kind of almost runs from the middle of July there to the July of the next year. So if we think about where we're at right now, if you're not already signed up in the program, you would have the option then to insure a dual purpose forage crop if you're grazing wheat or growing a cool season forage like triticale that might be grazing that out or taking that to silage. Spring crop, which we just come through a very dry spring, but if you were, you could insure something like spring oats or warm season crop, for example, would be something like a millet or sorghum sedan that you might be growing. So because it works kind of on that calendar year off of July, then the billing isn't done until August of 2027. So you could insure multiple growing seasons throughout that year, depending on your system and what kind of crops you're growing. So there's flexibility there in the types of crops you grow. And if you insure your spring crop, for example, you don't have to insure the warm season crop if you don't want to. So there's flexibility in using the program.
You mentioned you can insure dual use wheat. And so how does that work for growers?
In a dual purpose situation, let's make sure everybody's clear on what I mean by that. In a dual purpose system, you could graze that. That's very commonly done in Texas, Oklahoma, and the southern tiers counties of Kansas, not so much in the northern tiers of Kansas counties, but you could graze that wheat once it gets established in the fall and well rooted through the winter, early spring, and then you have to pull cattle off whatever comes first, either first hollow stem or March 15th, whichever is earlier. Pull cattle off, and then you could take that to grain production after that. So if you're intending to use it in that manner, you could use the annual foraging product for that grazing duration. It's at a reduced rate and coverage than if your intention was to fully take it for forage, because you could still have your multi-peril insurance for grain coverage. So we're talking just the forage production. That's at a reduced rate as compared to full graze out or silage type product.
So Jenny, what are some other options when it comes to insurance as well?
Yeah, there's a couple things you need to know. So a lot of producers are familiar with pasture, rangeland, and forage, PRF. That's also rainfall insurance, but it's for grazing or for perennials, for hay. And that uses the rainfall index, which is based on a grid. So it's for your grid, which is about 14 by 16 miles. So you're not insuring your property, you're insuring rainfall at the grid level. So sometimes that doesn't match what happens for a producer. So that's something you got to be aware of. Otherwise, like any insurance product, there's some choices you have to make, things you have to sit down and talk to a crop insurance agent about. Coverage level, that's typical. If you use crop insurance, you got to pick when you're going to receive an indemnity or what your deductible is. There's also something called a productivity factor. And so the guarantee for this, the value of what you're insuring, there's a sort of a county base value. There's an average at the county level. So with forage, you don't have this nice, well, here's the price and here's the yield and there's your guarantee. What you have is an average that's set for every county. And a producer has flexibility to decide if they want to scale this up or down. You also have some flexibility on when your growing season, you have the insurance. So you're planting in 1 month, and your insurance covers the second subsequent month called the growing season. So a producer has to pick when in the growing season they want the most coverage. It's interval selection. That part's a little tricky. It takes a while to wrap your head around. And that's something, again, sit down with an agent for the first time or two and work through that. And it definitely would get easier over time.
Have you seen any transitions or differences of how growers are using different insurances and coverages?
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been an increase in forage crops that are grown for livestock in western Kansas, like triticale and others that John talked about. And sometimes it's because of water shortages. Sometimes it's because there's opportunities with the livestock industry. And there is some frustration because insurance it seems difficult or different than if you're getting your standard multi-peril for crops, which a lot of producers have been using those policies for 3 decades. But the good news is you can almost always insure forage. I don't want to say bad news, but it is different. So these are different products. They might just pay on rainfall. They work a little bit differently. So there is a learning curve. And especially we talked about annual forage. Any annual crop that's grown for livestock can be insured. Also, the acreage reporting is really important. So, 5 days, the 5th day of the month after planting, you have to contact your agent. So that relationship is important as ever with annual forage insurance.
If people are wanting to find some more information on this, how can they do that?
AgManager.info is always a good start. We'll have a webinar that's recorded there that we're doing where John and I really get into details and work through examples with annual forage, and especially the dual use option. That's what we're focusing on this year. We're going to have somebody from RMA from the USDA come in and give an update. So that will be available at AgManager.info. We also have a lot of fact sheets and articles and links to other resources. And again, plenty of examples on AgManager.info.
Jeanne, John, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
That was K-State Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair Jeanne Ifft and K-State Cropping Systems and Forage Agronomist John Holman. I will link a few of those resources in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing controlling weeds before wheat harvest with K-State weed specialist Sarah Ganske and K-State Extension agronomist Jeanne Falk Jones. Sarah, Jeanne, I appreciate both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us, Shelby.
Happy to do so.
Jeanne, what are the current conditions of the wheat crop that is making weeds maybe an extra bit of a problem this year?
Well, we started off last fall with a really good stand of wheat, and Mother Nature has not helped us maintain that nice stand of wheat. And so really we're looking at thin stands as a result of drought conditions. The wheat is shorter. We have kind of an open canopy in a fair amount of fields across the state, and we've had some recent rains. And so as happens when we get some rain, it seems like we have a flush of weeds that are coming up. And if we had a good canopy in this wheat, then that would kind of hold those weeds back, but we have very open canopies, and so those weeds are kind of off to the races as they have germinated and had moisture to grow.
Are there any specific weeds that you're consistently seeing in fields?
Well, I think Palmer amaranth is always a challenge to have come through, and we're in that period of emergence at this point, and good conditions with moisture and warm temperatures. So Palmer amaranth is really kind of off to the races on this. Now, there may also be some other weeds that have been kind of hanging out below the canopy, and once we got some moisture, and kochia is kind of included in that when you get to the western part of the state. So a few weeds that we may be seeing coming lower in that canopy and just really kind of taking off and providing growth. And it gets to be a challenge when those weeds get up to the height of what we're going to be going through those fields with the header on the combine. And so, or even above the wheat heads. And so then we have the struggle of getting through those for harvesting our wheat.
And why is it something that you do see as really important to at least try to get these weeds controlled before you put the combine in the field?
Well, I think it goes to just the harvestability of that wheat. We want to be able to get through. We don't want a lot of green material going in the grain tank and then being docked at the elevator for that type of material that's going in. And so that's purely from the wheat perspective of it. But the other side of it is that we really want to prevent those weeds from getting any bigger and for really preventing them from using stored soil moisture, preventing them for setting seeds for next year. So it's not that we're just managing in this crop, we are thinking about the next crops that are coming after it too.
Sarah, what do you see as some options for control?
So the ones that I talk about the most with folks and this kind of depends on the weed size, the weed species, and budgets. But the two that I talk about the most seem to be Sharpen and Valor. So a saflufenicil is the active ingredient in Sharpen, and then flumioxazin. There's lots of different flumioxazins on the market, and they're really affordable. So those are two group 14 PPO inhibiting herbicides. They have good contact activity. Honestly, if I had big pigweeds or big kochia, either one, I know it's more pricey, but I would lean towards the Sharpen because you're going to be happier with the job that it does managing those weeds and getting them to dry down faster. The other advantage of Sharpen is that it only has a 3-day pre-harvest interval. So you can spray, the weeds will desiccate quickly, and you can get the combine in the field quickly. Some of the other things that are labeled include products like glyphosate or metsulfuron. But again, when we're talking about these key weeds that are present at wheat harvest, those herbicides are probably not going to be effective just due to herbicide resistance. So I don't talk about those two a lot. Another group 14 herbicide that we could use is carfentrazone or AIM. It just tends to be not quite as effective on those bigger weeds. So I don't recommend that one very often. And then the last two that we can talk about would be 2,4-D and dicamba. So one of the drawbacks to dicamba is that there can be some concerns with germination for seed wheat. So the questions that I'm getting are coming from folks cutting seed wheat. So I'm not going to make that dicamba recommendation because I don't want them to have trouble with their seed wheat. The downside of 2,4-D is that it actually has a 14-day pre-harvest interval. So you're supposed to wait, or you need to wait 2 weeks after you spray until you can get the combine in the field. And so with the weather conditions, I don't think anybody wants to wait 2 weeks to get the sprayer through the field and then get the combine through the field.
The other thing to think about with these also is that Sarah mentioned the group 14 herbicides, and those are really kind of burning type of herbicides. And so you'll see those plants kind of melt down and dry down a little bit faster versus something that is going into the plant and maybe being translocated and moving through the plant, a little slower death. And I get questions from farmers, are we actually killing the weeds, or are we just making them wilty and kind of turning them into just kind of ropey weeds out there that we're struggling to get cut through on it too? So there is some other things about the way that some of these herbicides act that maybe make them more attractive for getting in ahead of wheat harvest, in addition to the pre-harvest interval.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Jeannie. We want them to be dry going through the combine, not still green like they often are with 2,4-D and dicamba.
Do you ever see it having any impact on the wheat crop?
So at this point in the season, the wheat crop itself is made, right? You're not going to change yield. You're not going to change, protein content or test weight or anything like that. You can change, and Jeannie alluded to this at the beginning, you can change the value of that wheat crop when you take it to the elevator, just because of foreign material dockages as a result of all the residue or the plant material that can end up in the grain tank with your wheat.
The other thing that we're applying these herbicides when we're at hard dough stage. So we're less than 30% moisture. So like Sarah said, a lot of the yield components are set in that wheat. And so we don't want to jump the gun on putting our herbicide applications out too early for these pre-harvest treatments, because we want to make sure that that wheat is in the hard dough stage so that we are not, affecting some of those other yield components that Sarah mentioned.
We've discussed what can be used as a control option, but what is something that can absolutely not be used for wheat crop pre-harvest?
So gramoxone or paraquat types of products are illegal to spray as a harvest aid in wheats. It has to do with herbicide residues that can be found on the seed. And if, you sell that green and as it's going through the process of inspections, if paraquat residues are found on that seed, it cannot be sold. The whole shipment is done. So we don't want to be that guy who makes that happen. So paraquat, I understand why it's tempting, but it is not legal, and it's not legal for good reasons.
Anything else important for growers to take into consideration?
I would encourage farmers to go out and just take a look at their fields about a week ahead of when they think they're going to be ready, that wheat is going to be ready to harvest, and kind of make a plan for them. Prioritize those fields that have weeds that are coming in them. And I know it's challenging to put money into a wheat crop that is also not in great shape. And so our yields are not great. But at the same time, we also want to do the best we can with what's out there. And some of these Palmer amaranth and kochia are going to grow fast. So I would just say take a quick drive around, look at those wheat fields, get a game plan in your head for some of those that maybe we've got some Palmer amaranth or something that's coming on pretty fast in those, and then either prioritize those fields for harvesting first or prioritize those fields for going out and putting herbicide applications so that you can get through them. And it may not be the whole field. It may just be certain parts of a field that are really having an issue. So I think just good scouting ahead and getting a plan in place will really pay dividends down the line for harvest.
Jeanne, Sarah, I appreciate both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
Thanks for having us.
That was K-State Weed Specialist Sarah Ganske and K-State Extension Agronomist Jeanne Falk Jones. You will be able to read more on this topic by going to eUpdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey and USDA's Rod Bain as they discuss gradual improvements in pasture and rangeland conditions.
Recent rains, slowly but surely, positively affecting U.S. pastures and rangelands as a whole. Still,
only 31% nationally rated good to excellent. That is a 1-point improvement from the previous week. And then the very poor to poor rating has upped to 40%. Last week, that number was 42%.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says lower pasture conditions are still focused across the midsection of the nation.
If you look at the 10 states comprising the Great Plains and the Rockies, we see pasture conditions and rangeland conditions greater than 40%, very poor to poor in 6 of them, led by Nebraska at 80%. Coming up next on the list is Montana, 58%, and Wyoming at 56%. Other states that are above 40%, very poor to poor, in the middle part of the country include Colorado, along with New Mexico and South Dakota.
As well as the desert Southwest and parts of the East. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. If you're looking for a low-maintenance turf grass, K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan says that establishing a warm-season lawn is a great option. Matt, when it comes to establishing warm-season lawns, this is something that we're maybe starting to see a little bit of a shift in the fact that more and more people are kind of looking at the warm-season lawns.
Yes, warm-season lawns have really grown in increasing popularity over the past few years, really due to their reputation of being lower maintenance, and more importantly, being more heat and drought tolerant. So they really handle the Kansas summers very well, with a lot less water, a lot less fertilizer, and in some cases, a little less mowing as well.
Maybe we should go back and really talk about what we mean by warm season grasses. What are some of the varieties?
Warm season grasses are going to be those grasses that go dormant over the winter months and green up in the spring. Typically, the 3 most common warm season grasses in Kansas are going to be our Bermuda grass, our zoysia grass, and our buffalo grass lawns. A lot of our native grasses, for example, that we might see in the prairies, are often also native grasses that are warm season, but typically those aren't used in our turf grasses as frequently.
Is this something then that could actually be done statewide, or is this going to maybe work better in some areas than others?
So depending where you are in the state of Kansas, you may have different varieties that perform better. But for the most part, zoysia grass, buffalo grass, and Bermuda grass are planted statewide and really do very well.
When it comes to planting like buffalo grass, for instance, then, what are some of the steps involved?
When we are looking at a warm season grass like buffalo grass, for example, we want to make sure that that grass is going to be the right fit for our landscape and for our property. For the most part, a lot of our warm season grasses don't have a lot of shade tolerance, so they're not going to perform well in dense shade. That's really where our cool season grasses like tall fescue are going to be necessary in the landscape. But if we have areas of full sun, all of our warm season grasses can really grow very well. We also want to keep in mind that depending on the type of grass we choose, buffalo grass may spread by runners or stolons above and below ground, so we have to make sure we keep them out of our flower beds with some kind of border to minimize the amount of frustration we have once those lawns are established. And for buffalo grass, we have to keep in mind that the leaf color is a little bit different than we might expect with a tall fescue, for example. It's a little bit lighter green. And so as long as we're okay with some of those things and willing to adjust our maintenance practices to help minimize problems, these warm season grasses can be a great choice in the landscape. When we establish our warm season grasses, we typically have several options for how that can be done. Some of our warm season grasses can be established through grass seed, like we would typically establish most lawns. But some of our warm season grasses may need to be established by sod or by sprigs or plugs, which are basically smaller chunks of that turf grass that we would plant and establish as that plant grows out and fills in the space that it has to grow.
And there's really still an opportunity to try a warm season lawn this season, right?
Yes, warm season lawns in Kansas are established anywhere from typically May through July in Kansas. We want to make sure that we establish them as early as we can in the season, but we have to wait until the threats of freezes and frosts are gone before these grasses are really going to thrive. On the flip side of things, we want to make sure that we don't wait too late into the year to plant our grasses, because these warm season grasses need time to establish a really dense, healthy root system before the cold sets in the winter months and they go dormant. If we don't give our warm season grasses enough time to establish before fall and winter, we may see more winter injury their first or second year versus if we're trying to plant them early in the season in May and June.
And for those who are used to a cool season lawn, they're going to notice a difference in how the lawn appears throughout the season, right, if they switch to a warm season grass?
Yes, the appearance of warm season grasses and the maintenance of warm season grasses is really kind of the opposite of our cool season grasses. Our cool season grasses are best planted in the fall and spring, and that's when most of our fertilizing and mowing occurs. On our warm season grasses, however, they really grow best in the summer months. So they go dormant during the winter. They green up a few weeks later in the spring than our cool season grasses will, but they grow actively all summer long. And that typically is also the time of year we're going to want to do most of our fertilizing, core aerating, and mowing of these warm season grasses as well.
That's K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan with information on establishing a warm season lawn. To learn more, contact your local K-State Extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Farner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.